1, 2.
Morning, everyone. I'm pleased to call to order our 253rd meeting of the Pacific Fishery Management Council here in Roanoke Park, California. The meeting is open to the public. Copies of the meeting agenda and other documents used by the council during the meeting are available on the tables outside the room in the foyer. We encourage members of the public to testify and provide the council with their comments on any agenda item that's taken up by the council. In planning to testify, it's important for anyone wishing to testify to understand that when the council will take public comment on a particular agenda item, cannot always be accurately forecasted in advance. In particular, people should be aware that agenda items currently scheduled for the end of a particular day might be taken up the next day if we end up being behind on our schedule. To comment on an agenda item, you must sign up at the staff table. After public comment has begun on an item, no more names will be taken to testify. Each person has one opportunity to testify on each agenda item. Testimony on behalf of another person not in attendance will only be allowed within the period allowed for the person that is in attendance. Generally, we will limit individual testimony to 5 minutes for individuals and 10 minutes for groups or individuals representing organizations. Some agenda items may have several people wishing to testify, and if necessary to allow time for all to be heard, we may reduce that time. Be aware that we have a visual timer that shows a green light during your time allotment, a yellow light when you have about 30 seconds left, and a red light when your time is up. If you do have an electronic presentation, you need to submit that presentation prior to 5 p.m. the day before the agenda item is heard on the council's agenda. Documents will need to be submitted to Chris Kleinschmidt. Please contact Chris or the Secretariat if you have any questions. Anyone wishing to include written electronic comments in support of your verbal testimony also needs to provide those at 5 p.m. By 5 p.m. the day prior to your testimony. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed over the internet. Copies of the audio recordings will be available for review at the council office, or you may purchase copies from the meeting recorder, Mr. Craig Hess. Let me remind council members and others to speak directly into the microphone so that we can hear your comments. Lastly, I ask that the council members and members of the audience turn off the sound ringers on your cell phones while the council meeting is in session. We have kind of an unofficial practice around here that if your cell phone goes off during our meeting, you're obligated to bring donuts for the group the following morning. With regard to our donut situation, we do have a bit of a backup due to a lot of cell phones going off at the November meeting. John DeVore, Lori Steele, Ryan Wolf are all in the queue for this week. We may have to space them out a bit, so we'll have a coordinator. Once Kevin Dunn arrives, he'll be coordinating that. And we may actually have to roll one or more of those over to the April meeting so that we don't get in trouble with the hotel by bringing food here too often. So we'll work through that. Also, just a reminder for those of you around the table that these mics are live all the time. So what you say will be recorded. So if you don't want what you say to be recorded, you shouldn't be talking around your microphone. So just be aware of that. We do pick up, they are fairly sensitive and pick up things from a distance. So be aware of that. With that, I will turn to our executive director, who, by the way, is having a birthday today. We may have to sing him happy birthday a little later in the day, particularly if we get some donuts in here. But I will ask our executive director, Mr. Chuck Tracy, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council members, please acknowledge your presence when I call your name. Mr. Phil Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Corey Niles,
Here.
Mr. Bob Dooley,
Here.
Ms. Danny Evanson,
Present.
Mr. Mark Gurelnick,
Here.
Dr. Dave Hansen,
Here.
Mr. Pete Hassemer,
Here.
Mr. David Hogan, absent. Mr. Chris Kern,
Here.
Mr. Rich Lincoln, Lieutenant Commander Lee Crucius,
Here.
Mr. Virgil Moore,
Present.
Mr. Joe Oatman,
Here.
Mr. Brad Pettinger,
Here.
Mr. Kyle Hansen,
Here.
Mr. Frank Lockhart,
Here.
Ms. Krista Svensson,
Present.
Ms. Marcy Yaremko,
Here.
Mr. Louis Zim.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chuck. So we will come right back to you for the executive director's report.
Thank you. It's a little lengthier than usual today. It's been a long winter, and there's been some significant updates I'd like to mention to you. I'm going to start off with a little bit of public health business here. We did send out a notice and posted on our website banner our intent that we are going to conduct the March meeting in a normal manner, which means expecting people to attend in person. There's no domestic travel restrictions that are in effect. So we encourage people to monitor the CDC for guidance on COVID-19 issues. We will do the same. We'll keep you informed via our website and email if there's any updates. And we will be looking at the situation as it evolves with regard to our April council meeting. So if there's any changes, we will let you know. But at this point, we are just operating as usual. We've got some informational reports for your consideration. Informational report 1 is a report on the RecFin and MREP regional implementation planning priorities. Report 2 is a summary of federal legislation. We did not have our legislative committee meet, but we do get a report on legislation, so we just put that in as an informational report. Report 3 is a trawl rationalization compliance report put together by the enforcement consultants, I believe. And informational report 4 is just a notice from NIMS that there's a comment period opened for a draft document on determining negligible impact under Marine Mammal Protection Act. So if you'd like to comment on that, I think the comment period's open through about the middle of this month. Some other announcements. There will be a delegation of Mexican officials and stakeholders visiting the council meeting this week on Saturday and Sunday. They're here to observe our process and also our interaction with stakeholders. They're particularly interested in the Climate and Communities Initiative, HMS international activities, and whiting business. They'll be in the council chambers, I believe, Saturday morning and Sunday morning, and also attending some advisory sub-panel meetings. So just be aware that they'll be here. And make yourself known to them if you'd like to have conversation. I believe Katie Westfall and Melissa Mahoney of Environmental Defense Fund are the primary contacts regarding their visit. They organized this visit for them. We had a similar visit from a similar delegation, I think 5 or 6 years ago. So for those of you that were around, you might recall that. I also wanted to let you know that Sam Rauch will likely be here on Thursday and Friday to hear about salmon and halibut management. His attendance is not confirmed, but it's anticipated. So have an opportunity to say hi to Sam. Council staff, we had our annual retreat in December this year, and in addition to our usual agenda items of sort of identifying major activities and projects, identifying staff leads and timelines, and looking at ways to improve the council meeting process, We also spent a lot of time learning about and discussing 508 compliance. So Robert Bailey from NIMS West Coast Region gave us an overview on the background and mechanics of Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So these requirements govern accessibility of information technology in the federal government, and specifically require federal agencies to make their electronic information technology accessible to people with disabilities. And that includes the council, our website, our electronic technology. So we've followed up by establishing an internal policy and a best practices document. I'll read the policy just for the record. Council intends to provide access to documents on its website for persons with disabilities as required under the 508, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act to the extent practicable. Further, the council intends to facilitate the ability of NIMS to post 508 compliant documents produced by the council on its own website. So not all council documents will require 508 compliance, and some documents that the council posts are not produced by council staff, and compliance may not be under our control. So that's just a fair warning, I guess. In addition, the council website contains a large volume of historical documents, many of which would be impractical to convert to 508 compliant documents. Our intent is to produce 508 compliant documents as necessary and appropriate from 2020 onward, and to convert older documents that are present on the council website as time, money, and technology allows. While we don't expect to be able to make all posted historical documents 508 compliant, we intend to fulfill requests for specific documents to the extent practicable. So, so if there is some older documents that somebody requests, we will endeavor to convert those and make those on a as-needed basis, on a one-to-one basis. In the meantime, we're developing document templates for staff and advisory body use to facilitate production of 508 compliant documents. And you may notice some formatting changes in our reports and other briefing materials that reflect this effort. So the 508 compliance basically facilitates reading of documents, translation of documents from written to spoken, so that people that may not be able to read the documents can listen to the documents be read to them. So it requires some formatting of the documents so that the translation software can function properly and identify which parts of the documents are what, and description of figures and those sorts of things, so that people can understand what's in the document. Anyway, that is also part of our new website. As you may have noticed, we have launched our revised council website. I did just kind of want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of effort that went into that. We had a website committee that consisted of Sandra Krause, Chris Kleinschmidt, Jennifer Gilden, Kim Ambert, and Kit Dahl. They took the lead on doing that, although all staff contributed a fair amount to the new website. Again, we've migrated a large amount of content from our old website, and we're continuing the process as time allows. But until that process is complete, we have created a forum to request specific documents that may not be on the website, so staff can provide copies to individuals or prioritize posting of those materials. So I just wanted to say, feel free to let us know what you think about the website. If there's any suggestions, we do have an opportunity to make some changes as we go forward. But so far the feedback has been pretty positive. So we're very pleased with that project. Also wanted to let you know that we've started an office expansion project to enlarge our conference room and storage space. So for those of you that are familiar with our office, our large conference room will be expanded by about 50%, and it'll include an air wall so we can divide it into 2 rooms if we need to. This should provide more options for larger meetings and greater public attendance, and allow us to host more meetings at the office rather than contracting with hotel hotels for meeting space, which should help offset some of the additional lease costs on that. Just an update on our funding situation. The council's proposals for our 5-year 2020 to 2024 grant and the 1-year no-cost extension for the 2015 to 19 grant were approved. We received the first award from our new grant in December, which amounted to about 42% of the funding level that we estimated in the grant proposal. The final appropriations bills for fiscal year 2020 included a modest increase for the regional councils over 2019, but we have not seen the final total and breakdown of our funding. The regional councils, executive directors, so these are all the 8 regional councils around the country, EDs and other staff received a briefing from NIMS and NOAA General Counsel on a proposed rule to revise the CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality Guidelines for NEPA compliance. That is, the presentation is included as an attachment in the executive director's report, so agenda item A3, attachment 1. The proposed rule is open for comment through March 10th. And without getting into the merits of all the proposed changes, I just did want to bring one to the attention of the council, and that's this notion of functional equivalency. So this change would potentially allow the council's MSA process to be considered functionally equivalent to the NEPA process. So this is something that the council is on record supporting in the nature of a proposed amendment to the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So that's shown up in a couple of reauthorization bills. We've been on record supporting that. But it is not, I don't think it's in any current Magnuson Act legislation, but we are on record supporting that notion. But one feature of the proposed rule would allow agency procedures to be used to align compliance with NEPA and other statutes. So therefore, an MSA amendment may not be necessary to address this if this proposed rule were to go forward. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Again, there's quite a few changes in the proposed rule, including things like for NEPA documents, page limits and time limits and those sorts of things. So there's quite a bit in there. I don't really want to get into all that, but I did want to make the council aware of that one particular aspect that they have weighed in on in the past. And then finally, myself and Deputy Director Berner have met with NIMS leadership, Ryan Wolf, Kelly Ames, and Keely Kent. We've met twice during January and February to initiate discussions on revising our regional operating agreement. This is agreement between the council, West Coast Region, Science Centers, Office of Law Enforcement, and NOAA GC. This document defines the roles and responsibilities for council staff and the federal parties to accomplish the mandates of the council and the Secretary of Commerce under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Our last iteration of this, I think, was completed in 2017. And we do need to periodically review that and update it. So our intent is to have a draft revision to the council by November 2020 council meeting and then finalize the document in early 2021. So just to let you know that that process is ongoing and that there might be some changes to how we do business, but those are still being discussed internally with staff. So that concludes my report on that. I guess I'll pause there to see if there's any questions.
Questions of Chuck on his report? I don't see any.
Okay.
Does that conclude your report?
That concludes my report.
Thank you. All right, that takes us to A4, the consideration and approval of our agenda. You have your agenda in front of you, I assume. I would just note one thing, our in-season adjustment item for groundfish H5. We've been given a heads up, we may not have any recommended adjustments coming forward from the GMT and the GAP. But we still have the, and relative to the shore-based carryover, my understanding is that will not be taken up, is not ready to be taken up at this meeting, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That's the only note that I have on the agenda that you, that is out there and published, so if there are no other recommended changes, modifications to the agenda, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Virgil Moore, seconded by Pete Hassemer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions. We have an agenda for the meeting. So next up is our open public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on agenda item, on things that are not on our agenda. And let me ask Patricia if we have any cards.
Oh.
Oh. Mhm. Hang on just one sec. I'm just getting myself organized here. Okay, first I'll ask if there are any management entities that have any comment under this agenda item. All right. I also have a letter from Mr. Rodney Costin from the Colville Business Council, and I would ask if the Colville Business Council would like to make any comments. And if so, please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we do have your letter, March 3rd letter too.
Okay. Good morning, Tatsmewi, White Husquequest, Chairman Anderson, and members of the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. The purpose of this letter is to express the view and the preferences of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation for the 2020 North Falcon fishery. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation includes 12 tribes with approximately 10,000 enrolled tribal members. The Colville Reservation is located at the terminus of anadromous salmon migration on the Columbia River in north central Washington. Our waters include both healthy runs of summer, fall Chinook and sockeye salmon, as well as ESA-listed stocks of spring Chinook, salmon, and steelhead trout. The Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation are a salmon people, and historically our ancestors fished at many sites throughout the Columbia Basin, including the extremely productive Kettle Falls fishery. Due to overharvest by commercial fisheries in the late 1800s, habitat destruction by European settlers, and hydroelectric system development in the Columbia River Basin, including but not limited to the construction of Chief Joseph Dam and Grand Coulee dams, the salmon runs that used to support our subsistence and cultural needs were nearly lost and are currently a fraction of what they were. Current Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation fisheries are constructed to a very limited area in the Icicle River within the Wenatchee River Basin at the tail race of the Chief Joseph Dam and in the Okanagan River. Although the runs of summer chinook and sockeye have improved in recent years, the cultural and subsistence needs of the Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation are not met. We do not have a commercial salmon harvest because this basic ceremony and subsistence needs are not fulfilled by contemporary salmon runs. With low run sizes such as 2018, 2019, and those predicted for 2020, the practice of taking ocean harvests off the top of the non-treaty share leaves very few fish for sport and tribal fishermen upstream of Priest Rapids Dam and is therefore not consistent with the intent of Chapter 2A of the Harvest Sharing Agreement. In many years, we have foregone portions of our harvest allocation to achieve hatchery and wild population objectives because we recognize the importance of preserving salmon for future generations. The Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation strongly believes it is not fair for so much of the conservation to fall onto the terminal fishermen. The importance of salmon to the Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation cannot be overstated. Salmon fisheries play a central role in the lives of the tribes, forming a key part of our religion, culture, history, and identity. For this reason, the Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation have consistently requested coordination and cooperation with fish passage and reintroduction above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee dams. The tribes are not alone in calling for restoration of anadromous salmon to a currently blocked habitat in the Columbia River above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee dams. The National Congress of American Indians and the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians have also supported this position. The Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation supports the phased approach set out in the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's 2014 Columbia River Basin Fish and Wildlife Program, which includes appropriate studies to determine feasibility. The Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation fishery is not for economic or sports interest, but instead to perpetuate and sustain our culture, religion, and health. The Confederated Tribes of the Caldwell Reservation operates a hatchery and can produce approximately 3 million fish when operating at full capacity. While we are rebuilding threatened salmon species, we are potentially being punished for the overfishing of others. Although the Confederated Tribes is relatively new to this forum because of its legal and political efforts to rebuild salmon populations through hatchery supplementation, habitat improvements, and pushing for the reintroduction of salmon into the blocked areas, there have been improvements to the populations in the mainstream Columbia and the Okanagan River. We appreciate opportunity to address this body about an issue that is critically important to us. And attached to this are resolutions from the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and also from the National Congress of American Indians. And I just thank you for allowing me to make this statement. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much for coming forward and providing that comment in your letter. Are there any questions? All right, thanks very much. Appreciate your participation in our forum. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call up folks who've signed up to testify on our open public comment period for non-agenda items. Dan Yoakum is first, and Dan's going to be followed by Jana Hennig. Morning, Dan.
Hello, council members. I'm Dan Yoakum, a commercial fisherman. Been a fisherman for, well, I started when I was 16. I'm 63. So I'm here to represent several of the Fort Bragg hook and line fishermen today in a request for the RCA to be in the 4010 to 3427 line, the Fort Bragg area roughly, to be changed to a 90 fathom on the outside and 60 fathoms on the inside. And I'll go along with some other requests and then I'll elaborate. Also, we're requesting an increase of the canary rockfish to 1,200 pounds on the bi-monthly quota. And also the vermilion rockfish to have a separate quota of 400 pounds or better, along with an additional shelf rockfish quota, so to have separation. Also, the deeper nearshore fishery to be able to catch an additional 5,000 pounds of blues and blacks, similar to the north and south areas, north of the 4010 and south of the 34 line. So to elaborate on what's going on with our the 60 fathom line, we've been pinned to starting at 20 fathoms, which is just right outside the kelp bed. The kelp grows at 20 fathoms. Then it went to 30. The buoys are in 30 fathoms. They're in 28. All the Fort Bragg buoy, Albion buoy, Point Arena buoy. So it was just, out to the buoys. 40 fathoms in this area, basically from Cape Mendocino down to Gual area. 40 fathoms is just somewhat of a stone throw away from the buoys. So we've been pinned to the inside quite a bit. So with canary rockfish, what that does in the poundage that we've been allotted, the 300 pounds, is we're fishing a lot of juvenile canaries. And we get smaller, mediums, and small canaries. So realistically, we're catching more volume of fish for the same amount of weight. If we were out further, we would actually catch a smaller number of fish, or for the same weight. And there seems to be quite a few canary rockfish anyway. But so the catch ratio is with canaries is also not very balanced. When you go rock fishing, hook and line, and I'm talking vertical hook and line is what I primarily do myself. Some of the other guys do the long lines on the inside. And is fairly unbalanced with that. Where we are right now, you're catching a lot of canaries, and it isn't balanced with the other fish that you're getting. So if the canaries were increased at the rate that you're catching the fish that are available, just the mix, the catch mix that you get, you don't necessarily just get one kind on any old rock, as they move around. So that's one reason we're asking for that. The vermilions here, I understand that down in Southern California, the guys were asking for separation and on the vermilions. And in our area, the vermilions are different pretty much from down south. They're more prevalent down below Point Sur than they are in our area, but that I'm talking about. So I just would like to go along with that 400-pound mix anyways. On the 5,000-pound increase, blues and blacks in this area, the Fort Bragg area, primarily there's a lot of blues. The blacks seem to start somewhere about in the Utah area and north into Oregon, more so than south. There's south of that, there is a lot of blues. So at times the blues move around, and you're getting nothing but that. And is quite a bit of them. And so why fishing deeper nearshore fish, then you're, with the mix that you're confronted with, then blue rockfish are always there. And so if you fill your 1,200-pound quota with blues, or what are you going to do, discard them? But there's quite a resource of blues that we're not really getting into. With the separation of moving out to deeper 60 fathoms and into 90 fathoms, then we'll be able to access, say, yellowtails for one thing, which are a valuable hook and line fish, but they really aren't even in 40 fathoms that much. We don't get that many of them. There aren't major schools of them. They really roam more 60 and out, 50 and out, like that. So the amounts that we've been able to catch over the years in this area hasn't been really viable for the participating fishermen. It's only goes to a certain amount of money, and so the fishermen are participating in various other fisheries, you know, and so they aren't focusing just on hook and line fishing all the time. So the viability, the amount that we've been allowed to catch and been constrained to that so close to shore all the time, we haven't really been able to access the biomass that exists in the Fort Bragg area. And, you know, supporting at one time as it got fairly beat up by 23 draggers, and now 23 draggers is 1/3 of the entire coast. And so there is some rock cod in the area, and I'm saying hook and line is a good way of going about it, and we've been pretty constrained, the hook and line fishermen. There's only about 3 or 4 or 5 guys that even participate in it that much, off and on. So it needs to be increased. So that is the request that Dan Platt will elaborate on this. We were supposed to get this request in writing to you earlier, but you didn't. So this is the request, and Dan Platt will elaborate along with that later on. And one of my comrades will speak on this issue also. So secondly, I would request that in the research department, that hook and line be included in research biomass estimates, which for a long time it's only been trawling survey. And then we're saying that the goldeneye, the cowcod are, you know, far behind rebuilding or wherever they're at. But basically, rock cod, named rock cod for a reason, and a trawler not really wanting to hook his net on a rock. And so there's a lot of places where the trawl survey falls short. So that's why I'm requesting that hook and line vertical be included in a biomass estimate or developed into the research side of things. And I know this creates a problem with goldeneyes and or cowcods as the way they are at the moment, the status that they are, and then quota allocations. But and I had a proposal for that we were going to submit at one time, but it got turned around basically it was written out as a EFP, which it really isn't. The request is more for research, and the EFP is not that. So any questions?
Thanks, Dan. Any questions? Marcy Remco.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Dan, I want to welcome you to the council process. I don't think I've ever seen you here at a council meeting. By way of introduction, Dan is a very active participant in a number of stateside forums, including our Fish and Game Commission. He has been engaged over the years in development of our management for squid fisheries, CPS fisheries, and a number herring fisheries, and probably a few others that I'm forgetting. So it's a pleasure to see you here today. Thank you for coming to the meeting. I just want to, I think, acknowledge that we hear you with regard to your interest in pursuing new opportunities for the non-trawl commercial sector. We understand that you have been patiently waiting for rebuilding to occur, and now there is seemingly some available opportunity in our future. And it is great to see you and your fellow folks from Fort Bragg actively engage in these discussions as we look to increase opportunities for the open access sector in particular. I just want to flag that some of the items that you have suggested on the list are things that we may be able to consider in the current biennial specifications process. So some of the specifics on the recommended trip limits we are looking at. I would encourage you, if you are going to be here tomorrow, we are going to get into some of the nitty-gritty detail on some trip limit alternatives that we will be looking to propose as part of the biennial specifications process that really we're working on in preparation for some recommendations we'll be making at the April council meeting. But we would love your input. So if you are around tomorrow, please get a hold of me or one of my staff for information on the meeting. We have been doing some analysis over winter to kind of look at where we might offer some increases within the new specifications that will be established as part of the biennial specs process. I know it's confusing and I know it's difficult to figure out exactly when to offer input and under what agenda item. So we're going to do our best to help our folks out and kind of walk through a number of things with regard to trip limits. So I guess with that, again, I really appreciate you coming, and a number of these things kind of are on our list already. So tomorrow night in our, it's kind of an expanded discussion of our state delegation that we're looking to have. So we'll be in touch with you. I'll catch you here on a sidebar or something. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcy, and thanks, Dan, for coming forward, and welcome to our process. Any other questions for Dan? Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, thanks, council members.
Anna Hennig, and Anna will be followed by Harrison Ibach.
Good morning, Chairman Anderson and council members. Happy to be here. My name is Jana Hennig. I'm the Executive Director of Positively Groundfish, which is still a relatively new nonprofit formed about 2 years ago as a big collaborative effort between lots of stakeholders in the West Coast groundfish fishery, including fishermen, processors like Pacific, Bornstein's, Hallmark, Arctic Storm, Dayang, as well as the Environmental Defense Fund, the Marine Stewardship Council, Oregon Trawl Commission, and with support from Oregon State University and Corey Niles from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm here to give you an update on some of the work we've been doing, particularly how we've been using an SK grant for the last year or so, mainly for the group's awareness that what work is going on the market side of things. Do I have to point it somewhere? I don't know, it's not going. Is it on? Okay. Why don't you advance it? All right, so our stated mission as a group is to be the ones that actually do the legwork of marketing and promoting West Coast groundfish in order to increase market demand and cultivate consumer appreciation for these species for the benefit of fishing communities all along the West Coast. So we're a very inclusive group, West Coast wide, and we're always welcoming new members to join our collective effort. We'll just skip over that. So we've been very grateful to have been given an SK grant sort of in late 2018 of about $300,000. It had three major objectives. It was for us to increase awareness and trial. That means people knowing about these species and having actually tasted them, knowing whether they taste and like their texture, to increase availability in retail and food service, and for us to fill in some of our knowledge gaps by doing consumer insight work and starting to track markets. We've been focusing only on MSC certified rockfish and sole, really mainly yellowtail and widow rockfish, as well as Stover sole and petrale sole. We've been focusing entirely on the US domestic market, mainly really on the West Coast states, and targeting buyers, retail buyers, chefs, and foodie consumers. About a quarter of our funds were used for a pretty comprehensive insight program, spanning most of the important stakeholders in sort of the market side. So we're running a consumer survey with about 2,000 participants to put numbers against some of the basic consumer metrics like awareness, trial, current usage, and attitudes toward these species, running a very standard protocol within the sort of consumer goods industry. We've also conducted in-person surveys with chefs and fish counter staff, two very important groups that really have a big impact on consumer purchase decisions at the final point, and to test their personal trial, awareness, usage, attitudes toward our products, because those do come out in the kind of recommendations or the way they are directing consumers at the point of purchase. And those have been very insightful, somewhat terrifying, insightful pieces of work, to think that a lot of the work that we're doing really comes down to the person behind the fish counter who is on minimum wage, doesn't really like being there, and has never been trained in any seafood matters, and is certainly not really equipped to answer some of the pretty complex questions they get, or to really give a correct, nuanced answer to some of the questions consumers pose to them. And the majority of shoppers do ask them for something, for some kind of recommendation. We've also been buying some standard data that is available to be bought, like retail, scanner data, as well as menu distribution data from Mintel. And finally, we are conducting industry economic outlook surveys, taking sort of the pulse on fishermen's and processors' forward-looking confidence about West Coast groundfish from an economic perspective as a leading indicator of sort of community well-being. We've conducted one before we started, and we'll be doing one again later in the year when we're finishing with this grant. The majority of our funds have been used to do what we call storied sampling, so sampling with a story, because we do have a fantastic story to tell. I guess when you're doing marketing, you kind of have to make a choice whether you want to go broad but shallow, so reaching a lot of people, but only for a flicker of a second that it takes to see a poster or a billboard, or whether you want to go narrow and deep. And we've decided to go narrow and deep because we wanted to really have a more experiential encounter with new consumers and give them a taste of these species and be able to really control people's first eating experience and be able to tell the story. So we've created this mobile kitchen, and then we started hitting a lot of trade shows. Some of you may have seen us out there. Instead of just going to seafood-oriented shows. We've been going to a lot of broader food shows like Expo West, like the Fancy Food Show, Slow Food Nations, etc. Often we're the only seafood player at these food shows. And so we've been getting a lot of new buyers and people interested in us. We've also been doing VIP dinners. For example, rockfish was the main course at the Capitol Hill Ocean Week Gala, was really the star, showcasing the good work we've been doing here on the West Coast to the folks in DC and others. So, and then, of course, we've been engaging the foodie public at a lot of food festivals. We've basically always had a line and been able to answer a lot of the consumers' sort of seafood-related questions. Next. Our samples are not, sad Costco samples, but they are really quite fancy. We always made sure that they look and are presented really well, that they have really great names and are restaurant quality, and we've been getting very overwhelmingly positive reactions to all of our samples. We hear frequently that people think we're the best stall, basically, in all of these big food shows. And we do give out recipe cards, coupons, etc., to sort of lead consumers to make purchases later on. Next. So far, we've been giving out about 33,000 dishes of that sort to about 18,500 people. It'll be about 50,000 by the time we're done. We've been getting some great news coverage, free, 83 articles so far, and counting some of those in really big publications like the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Seattle Times, etc., NPR. So millions of Americans are starting to hear about this story. We've been getting a lot of work, a lot of help to do this. So chefs donated 20 new recipes, processors donated 900 pounds of fish, and our members have given 873 volunteer hours. So it's a really big collaborative effort to do this. And we're seeing it work. So, for example, this is rockfish retail level data, total US. Dollar sales have gone up by 23%. But even more so in the states that we've actually been focusing on. So in Washington State, it's up 65%, Oregon plus 36%, a little bit less in California, so that needs a little bit more effort. And it's been financially relatively healthy growth. We can see that by the non-promotional volume sales, so the amount of fish sold without a discount, which is up 25%, even more. So our average retail price has been increasing by 4%. So these are these are increases off of a relatively small base, but we're moving in the right direction. As lessons go, you're gonna have to just click through it. Consumers are very surprised to hear that there is a positive environmental story. There's a perception that it's all doom and gloom, everything is going down the pan, but they're very relieved to hear that there is something to celebrate and something we can eat with a good conscience. Despite these being underutilized and undervalued, rockfish and sole are really not a hard sell. People absolutely love the taste, the story, the provenance, and everything about the product. It's not hard work from a marketing perspective. I've definitely had to sell harder things in my life, but it's work that needs to be done and needs to be done consistently over many years. You don't build awareness and preference for a new product in one campaign. This needs like 5-10 years of consistent effort and consistent messaging in order to really make these species come back.
So your time is about up, so if you have any summarizing comments you wish to make.
This is the end. We do talk a lot about sustainability to consumers. I can tell you that nobody really ever questions me what I mean with that, which concerns me because that, to me, that indicates that basically anyone can make that claim and not go questioned by consumers, unfortunately. And after having talked personally to like good 10,000 people this year, I can tell you that nobody understands the word sustainable anyway, from even just conceptually. they don't understand what that means. So there is a lot of communication work that needs to be done at a bigger level to get the public aware of what sustainable fisheries management means really in practice. And I'll finish there.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting. Any questions? Corey Niles.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Not a question. Just want to thank Yana for being here and giving this presentation. As she said, I've been lucky to have been an advisor to the group for a couple years now, and it's been super impressive to see these people come together, the buyers and people like Brad and the Fisher side of things. So I'm continually impressed, and thank you for being here to tell the story. And I'm also really happy, I think, to say in the coming future, you'll hear my agency broadly also doing a similar thing, trying to tell the story of and take pride in the fisheries of Washington and the fisheries of this council manages. So it's really good to see people telling that story and coming together about. And thank you for being here.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions for Yana? Marcy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just curious, you've mentioned rockfish a number of times, and then I think I also saw sole, and then I saw a little sign in there referencing black cod or sablefish. But can you tell us specifically which species of rockfish you have found to be most effective?
We have mainly been using yellowtail rockfish and widow rockfish, sort of the big commercial species. In terms of effectiveness, honestly, most of the time a consumer will only encounter rockfish as rockfish rather than as a specific species. From a taste perspective, we have found all of them to work in our recipes. We've tried whatever we could get at the time, to be honest, rather than really going down to species level in too much detail. There are very few people that know to appreciate the nuances. In time, maybe.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate the presentation. Harrison Eibach, followed by Daniel Lee.
Good morning, Chair Anderson and Council. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this morning. My name is Harrison Eibach, and I've always loved fish and fishing since I was a child, and began commercial fishing in 2005, which happened to be at a time when most of the groundfish stocks on the Pacific coast were considered depleted. I started fishing out of a small skiff, mainly participating in open access fisheries. Over time, I've slowly worked my way into larger vessels and purchasing permits, all the while groundfish stocks were slowly rebuilding. Now, at this present moment, most all the groundfish stocks are rebuilt way ahead of schedule in what should be considered one of the greatest success stories in fisheries management. It is a huge accomplishment that could only be achieved because scientists, managers, fishermen, this council, and the entire industry work together. We need to maintain the health of this groundfish success story with appropriated funding and data collection, but also provide more opportunity to open access fishermen. With the abundance of groundfish, there should be more open access fishing opportunity, which is crucial for the survival of the fishing industry. Most fisheries require a large financial investment in order to participate, which pose challenges for entry-level fishermen. The open access fishery is the most affordable way for new fishermen to work their way up the ladder, building upon their business and becoming the future of the industry. There's too much uncertainty with the dominant Dungeness crab and salmon fisheries at this present time. We must provide more opportunity to the fleet to maintain their survival. On the west coast of the United States, we have some of the most sustainable fisheries in the world. Wild, sustainably caught seafood is considered to be the absolute best form of seafood on the planet, and we as fishermen strive to make these resources available. As fishermen retire, it is important to maintain fishing opportunity while keeping costs low enough for fishermen to enter and survive in the business. Fishermen face many challenges, but we are confident that we will always get support to maintain healthy, sustainable fisheries and preserve the future of this industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Questions for Harrison? Frank Lockhart.
Thanks for your comments. And so I'm just kind of wondering, is it, you mentioned that the rebuilding should lead to greater access for open access fishermen. Is there some sort of limitation that's affecting open access fishermen now, or is it just kind of a, for lack of a better word, a fairness thing? That
I believe that what I mean by that is we would like some more opportunity. And opportunity is more access to grounds, such as was brought up before, maybe narrowing the non-trawl RCAs up and down the entire West Coast, and also trying to boost trip limits to provide more opportunity.
Thank you.
Other questions for Harrison? Thanks very much for being here. Daniel Lee, and Daniel will be followed by Kevin Butler.
My name is Daniel Lee. I'm a commercial fisherman from Fort Bragg in Eureka, California, and I have a proposal for blue and deacon rockfish to become their separate quota from other deeper nearshore rockfish. For the rest of this presentation, I'll be referring to them as BDR. Next slide, please. So current regulations are split along, in California, are split along the 4010 line. South of the 4010, as it reads right now, we're allowed 1,200 pounds of deeper nearshore rockfish every 2 months for most of the fishing blocks throughout the year. North of the 4010, we're allowed 8,500 pounds of deeper nearshore rockfish, which is largely only allowed to be caught as black rockfish quota. Next slide. My proposal for north of the 4010 to the 42 would pretty much keep the same total poundage in place with both the non-black rockfish and black rockfish, but it would allow us to catch an additional 2,000 pounds of blue rockfish, specifically not counted against our other fish. Next slide, please. South of the 4010 down to the 36, I'm basically asking for an increase of 2,000 pounds per month of the total quota. However, only 2,000 pounds or 2,000 pounds of that will be used for the sub-quota of blues and deacon rockfish. It wouldn't actually change fishing pressure on the other fish, such as tree fish, calicos, quillbacks, coppers, and browns. Next slide, please. I have some justifications for that, and that is the abundance of BDR, the economic impacts, natural history of the species complex, and then I'll address potential concerns at the end. Next slide, please. This is from the 2017 stock assessment of blue and deacon rockfish, and it's basically the catch rate within the for the California coastline north of Point Conception. And I'd like to point out some interesting stuff here. There was over 555 metric tons of blue rockfish landed by the recreational fleet alone, while landings for the for 5 years for the commercial fleet only tallied about 35 metric tons, or less than 10%. It also makes the BDR complex one of the most commonly caught nearshore fish in California, if not the most commonly caught nearshore rockfish. Next slide, please. So again, on abundance, looking forward, these are the projection numbers from the 2017 stock assessment. There's some important stuff to note here. In 2013, as well as 2008 and 2009, there was robust spawn. They were able to breed at a much higher rate than they normally would have. And those fish are now getting old enough to be considered commercially viable. And if you actually look down towards like 2020 and beyond, you'll see the OFL and the ABC actually nearly doubles from what it was before. So we're looking at basically more blue and deacon rockfish in the ocean than we've had in the previous like couple decades. Which definitely would allow us to be able to sustainably take these for years to come, at least through the rest of the projection outline of 2028. Next slide, please. Economics. So I longline for my deeper nearshore rockfish, which means that most of the rockfish that I bring in are caught from the bottom, bring them to the surface. We actually remove the air from the swim bladder, put them in a live tank, and deliver to a live market. Blues are really weird that they're still considered in this deeper nearshore complex because they fare very poorly as a live fish. They're actually one of the least sought after. There was a statistic from 1996 to 1998 of all the live rockfish that were brought into Morro Bay, which is one of the largest landing ports of live rockfish north of Point Conception. Less than 1% was blue rockfish. And they're counted equally in the quota. It doesn't make much sense for me to take a fish that I catch live and make $6, $7 a pound for versus a dead fish that I only make $1 to $2 a pound for. However, the regular rockfish markets, as another presenter showed, was the dead fresh fish market, which is actually growing and it's in demand, and it allows people to get another type of fresh fish, which is what a blue rockfish is perfect for. And if we're able to increase these quotas and give a fisherman more opportunity to get into these fresh fish markets, not only does it help us, but it helps the community understand and support us more as small boat fishermen. Next slide. So what makes blue rockfish really separatable from the rest of the rockfish that I mentioned earlier was that the other ones are fossorial. They tend to live on the ground. They tend to be more susceptible to long lines. These ones tend to be more pelagic, and they actually did I know I'm just slightly over my time, but I want to finish this point. They did a Stephen McCall logistical regression to see which other species of rockfish were most likely to occur with blue rockfish during this. And the two of the ones that came up were yellowtail and widows as the most common rockfish. And this is important because as we look forward, we're going to be getting larger quotas of widow rockfish, of yellowtail rockfish. Therefore, we're going to be encountering these blue rockfish at a much greater rate than we're encountering them right now with our current fishing techniques. And I just want to make sure that as we're having this as an additional bycatch, that we're able to retain it because it is a good marketable species. And with that, I'll wrap up my time.
Thanks, Daniel. Questions for Daniel? Louis Zim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lee, for coming forward with this. You're a set line fisherman. How would you, if you got an increase in blue rockfish, how would you prosecute the fishery for this? You'd have to change something.
So as of right now, I'm using set lines because I'm trying to not or happen to have them as a bycatch. I'm trying to target my live fish. When I fish out of Eureka, we have a black rockfish subquota, which tends to be lost fossorial, more benthic, up in the water column. I would actually use snake gear, which is a type of gear. It's a single main line with many lures attached to it, and it's trolled from a lead ball. So I actually go over the schools, and a lot of times, like if you see a school of blue rockfish, you actually look at the top of the school of blue rockfish unless they're smaller rockfish. Towards the bottom, there's larger rockfish. With snake gear, you're able to go over a school, actually meter where the larger fish are within it, send lead ball down outside the school, and target the larger fish in the column. So you can really actually pick what you're going to catch. And a lot of times what I would do if I was trying to target, let's say, a black rockfish, not blues, because we have a lot of blue rockfish in the area, I'd actually stop at the fishing rod, sample the school, see what was in it, and if it happened to not be the target species, in this case blacks, then I'd move on to the next school until I found the right school to hit.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Daniel? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, Daniel, just one other question. I'm assuming you're bringing your proposal forward through the Groundfish Advisory Panel process as well. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Okay.
I'm new to this. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm new to this. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. That's good. We're happy you're here. At the break, let me hook up with you for a few minutes, and I can give you a few pointers on a good way to take your proposal forward.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you. I would appreciate that.
All right. Kevin Butler.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Butler. I'm a commercial fisherman out of Santa Cruz, California. Primarily open access and salmon. I came here today to ask for some more allocation, depth, and quota for the non-trawl RCAs off of California coastline. Primary reason is the rebuilding of the stock and also the economic viability of the small boat fleet. One who doesn't participate in the crab, going off salmon alone in open access, this would actually make it a lot easier to pay insurances, get us through the tough times so we can get back to our good fisheries. So in a nutshell, it's what I'm asking for is just to look in the possibilities of just increasing the access to these non-trawl RCAs. Thank you for your time. Thank you for hearing me.
Thanks, Kevin. Any questions for Kevin? Kevin, I will say that our Groundfish Advisory Panel, which is meeting here this week soon.
Tomorrow.
Pardon me? Tomorrow. Among the items that the Groundfish Advisory Panel is dealing with is this issue about non-trawl RCAs. And so sitting in and making your thoughts known to that group will also be beneficial. I don't know if you're going to be here for how long you're going to be here, but again, tomorrow when they meet, and you have fishermen, there are designated seats on there for fishermen representing the interests of California in particular, that you can also coordinate with. Any other questions for Kevin? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of our open public comment on non-agenda items. And that will take us to our first administrative matter agenda item, report of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And Marcy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, or Mr. Chair. I was thinking we might have a little bit of discussion under open comment just as a follow-up. I would be remiss if I did not call out the letter that the council received from Senator Mike McGuire on the topic of prioritizing analysis and discussion of opening the non-trawl rockfish RCA. Several of the speakers here today, I think, echo the sentiments that are contained in this letter. They have specific on-the-water experience and other suggestions that they'll make to us in the council process. But I believe this letter from Senator McGuire does reflect kind of a broad base of support for this particular item to be prioritized in the council's discussion. So just want to thank again all of the California stakeholders that offered input to the briefing book under various agenda items on the topic of rebuilding our non-trawl commercial fisheries. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. And I apologize if I rushed off to the next agenda item too quickly. All right. Again, we'll move to C1, the report of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And let me turn to Kerry Griffin for an overview of this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is agenda item C1, report of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, also known as the National Marine Sanctuaries Coordination Report. They come to the council every year about this time and give an update on West Coast Marine Sanctuaries activities, what's been happening and what's coming during the next year or two. And we have Bill Douros here, who's the director of the West Coast Regional Office for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries.
Great, thank you. And welcome, Bill. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the chance to come and make a presentation to you. There's a PowerPoint we submitted. We can sort of jump right into that. What I want to start with, though, is to make clear we've submitted a written report. You've got that, and I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm going to flag some of the things that we felt were important to highlight regarding the sanctuary program itself and what's going on, from that report. But I'll try to keep it brief and be able to answer questions. But we have been doing this now for I think 4 or 5 years, and we value this too as a way to come and connect. I think you all know Lisa Lonink, who's in our West Coast Regional Office, and has been on the Habitat Committee for probably about 10 years. And we appreciate your welcoming her and having an opportunity for her to participate within your programs. So the report itself goes over the status of things like sanctuary nominations, management plan review processes, ancillary management activities, things we're doing with climate change, habitat and science and monitoring we're doing there, as well as other broader research and monitoring issues. I'm going to touch just on some of the highlights of most of these, but not all of them. It's important. We wanted just to remind everyone, though I think would be hopeful that the amount of time we've spent together and doing these annual meetings, this isn't something we have to dwell much on. But marine sanctuaries, and we've got 5 on the West Coast. There's now 14 sanctuaries and 2 marine national monuments that are part of the system. And I'll show you a slide of that in a second. But now if you go back, so marine sanctuaries are places that have been set up by the federal government. They can include state waters. We do a lot of work to raise public awareness and understanding through education and outreach about the resources in that area, why these are important and special places. We do a lot to coordinate and improve management through research and through other strategies that can help ensure resource protection. And it's important to note that these resources are the living marine resources, the habitat that they depend on, but also what we call the submerged maritime heritage, or the cultural heritage along the coastline for those places. And so it's both living and historical marine resources. And what we found, and you'll see that in a minute, that we're able to promote these places to help benefit coastal economies with that particular focus, both on natural resources, but also growingly on historical resources. And the public's interest in maritime heritage sites is pretty significant. So these are the sites around the program. And you can see there's 5 on the West Coast, and there's other maps that show you those in more detail. But it does include 2 of the 4 or so, 5 marine national monuments that have been designated. 3 of those are managed by National Marine Fisheries Service, but 2 of them are included within the National Marine Sanctuary System, Rose Atoll at American Samoa, and then Papahanaumokuakea. Next slide. So I want to talk about the sanctuary nomination process. This is an opportunity for the public to put areas forward for NOAA to consider as potential sites to designate as a national marine sanctuary. We restarted this process about 7 years ago. I think it'll be 7 years in June. And we've received across the country a dozen or so nominations. And these show different categories. So I'm just going to walk you through the categories of sites, but not get into the sites specifically. So we have, in order to designate a site, it needs to first be accepted into the inventory of candidate sites. There's 5 sites that are actively, existing, if you will, in the pool of candidate sites. In purple, there's 2 that I've noted in purple here. These are sites that are on the West Coast that would be overlapping with the Pacific Fishery Management Council. Chumash Heritage is down in the area between Monterey Bay and Channel Islands Sanctuary off San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. And in a minute, I'll talk more about that. But then there's Lake Erie, St. George. Unangan Heritage is around one of the Pribilof Islands in Alaska, Hudson Canyon, and Mariana Trench. And you can see of these, interestingly enough, we kind of lump together submerged maritime heritage, so shipwrecks, but also cultural heritage. And you can see of the 5 sites that are in the inventory, 4 of them are focused on shipwrecks, the Lake Erie Quadrangle site, and well, two others that we're designating, as well as Native American, Native Alaskan tribal cultural heritage. This is where these communities have come forward and said, we identify with these resources, and we think the resources help shape and showcase our culture. We have recently designated a new sanctuary, the Mallows Bay Potomac River Sanctuary. There are other designations in process. One is offshore Wisconsin and Lake Michigan, and another is offshore New York and Lake Ontario. All of these Great Lakes sites are shipwreck sites. There's a long, storied history of shipwrecks within the Great Lakes, and they've really identified with the sanctuary program and have come forward with us with a number of proposals. You can see another nomination under review that we've received is on the Shipwreck Coast, which is also in Michigan, and that's in Lake Huron. So we have declined some nominations that we've received. The first one we received for the Chumash Heritage was not adequate. We declined that. They resubmitted it, and we accepted that. There was another one, Southern California Offshore Banks, centered around Tanner and Cortez Bank and several others in that area. We declined that one as well. We didn't think it met all of the criteria. There's one in Florida and then a huge one in Alaska that we also declined. Ironically, that one was just far too massive. And one of the expectations of marine sanctuaries is if we're designating a new sanctuary, it's the minimum area or the maximum area that you need to protect those resources. And then there's two other nominations that have been withdrawn. So the nominations get a lot of attention. There are a lot of communities that would love to see more and bigger marine sanctuaries, and then there's some that are nervous about seeing any new or expanded sanctuaries. So I wanted to flag this, and there's more in the written report itself. Next slide. The one I'm going to concentrate on that is active here is the Chumash Heritage nomination. This slide shows you that the northern sanctuary there in this slide in the map is Monterey Bay, and then the Channel Islands sanctuary surrounds the 5 northern Channel Islands. And it was proposed by the Northern Chumash Tribal Council as well as the Sierra Club. And we reviewed it. As I noted earlier, there were a couple back and forths on the nomination, and it was added to the inventory in October 2015. NOAA's not actively planning to designate it. As I mentioned, there's 2 other sites that are under active consideration, but not this one. And there's a whole lengthy public process. It takes 2 to 3 years if we were to designate it. But one thing that we do need to do is every 5 years do an assessment of whether or not we want that site to stay in the inventory. Is it still valid? Are the characteristics that were proposed still legitimate? Are the criteria that we use to evaluate those, and those are included in regulation, are those still relevant? And so over the next couple months, we're going to be undergoing a process to collect information about that nomination specific to the criteria. It's not a question of, does, individual X or institution X, Y, or Z or a city want to see it designated. That's not the question. Rather, it's, are the criteria still relevant, and should it remain in the inventory for 5 more years? We need to make a decision by October 2020, and so we're going to be undertaking a process in the next couple months to get some input on that. Next slide. I did want to just draw a little bit of attention to this new sanctuary. It is in the area of the Potomac River, and it includes a whole host, over 120, roughly 120 shipwrecks that were from the World War I era that were brought to and stored temporarily in this bay, Mallows Bay in the Potomac River. And it's one that we co-manage with the state of Maryland and Charles County. And again, there's tremendous interest in these historical sites, these areas with an abundance of shipwrecks in our program. Next slide. So on the West Coast, some things to flag that have intersected with and will continue to intersect with the council staff and National Marine Fishery Service, as well as the council itself perhaps, are The precursor to updating a sanctuary management plan is to do a condition report to assess the condition of the resources. Last year, I mentioned we were beginning the Olympic Coast process. That's about a 2-year process. We're about halfway through that. We've had a couple of workshops, one in May, to identify with science partners indicators, what would indicate a healthy sanctuary specific to Olympic Coast, and then follow that up with a detailed discussion 2 months ago regarding the particulars of the ecosystem and who has data that can help inform us regarding the health and status of the sanctuary habitats and the resources we protect. And then we've just begun the process just a week ago with the Cordell Bank Sanctuary Advisory Council, briefing them on that 2-year process for Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary. So the next slide. And if you do want more information on this, we just published about a year ago the Channel Islands Condition Report. And it's a phenomenal document, very well researched. National Marine Fisheries Service contributed a lot to it. Our joint effort on integrated ecosystem assessments, the IEA process, informed that as well. But that's available on the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary website. As I said, those are precursors to management plan review processes. In the next month, although it's been in the next month for about a year, we intend to release the draft management plan, an environmental assessment, and maybe a half dozen or so regulatory changes for Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. We've been working on that for about 5 years now. We've retooled the management plan itself so that it's focused on programmatic activities like education and outreach, research and monitoring, but also some new action plans like climate change and marine debris and coastal erosion. And so those are meant to be the issues we anticipate, again, highly public in terms of the process to develop it. We anticipate going forward that site's going to concentrate on over the next 5 to 10 years. And the regulatory changes in past management plan review processes, there's been a lot of discussion at the council with us providing presentations because of concerns that we were straying into or near fisheries issues in our regulations. We weren't then and we aren't now. The changes here are pretty straightforward. We want to increase the options that are available to harbors. In one particular case, off Pillar Point, for disposing sand, clean dredge material that can help both open up the harbor as well as stabilize and expand beaches in that area. And there's a regulatory adjustment we need to make there. And we're making other changes to improve motorized personal watercraft use, one at the big wave surf site Mavericks, to increase the window of time in which they can operate jet skis, motorized personal watercraft, and also to better design the zones that are off all 4 of the harbors. We're maintaining those. And so there's a couple other really small-scale regulatory changes. So we've flagged that for you all. Now, maybe those could be decreased, but we're not going to get any new regulations stuck in there that we aren't anticipating. Again, that should be in the next month or two. If you could go back. And then the Channel Islands management plan review process has begun. They issued a notice of intent in the fall and have been engaged in the public process with the Sanctuary Advisory Council for Channel Islands now actively reviewing. And I think next week we have a meeting where they're going to be providing us the feedback from each of the constituents that are represented on the Advisory Council on what issues they think we should focus on as we revise that site's management plan. So again, there were some issues related to fishing, but it doesn't, in my view, it's not timely to talk to you all about that now. Let's see what we get back from the Advisory Council and what it is that we might tackle. But the main ones there were focused on the marine reserves at the Channel Islands that we co-manage with National Marine Fisheries Service and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Some wanted them bigger, some wanted them smaller, some wanted the regs changed. And so that might be an issue that could intersect with council interests, but it's premature at this point to spend much time worrying about that. Let's see what we get back from that Advisory Council process. Next slide. We've been doing a lot of work on benthic habitat research to better characterize, map the seafloors, to visually survey these areas that have been mapped in the past to better understand what that habitat is. Some of this is to help advise us, and we frankly think the council as well, about better decision-making on sensitive habitats to protect, potentially areas to open. And, you know, it's a very important habitat within all 5 of these West Coast sanctuaries. And we put a lot of effort into it. And the we it's a very big we. It's not just the 5 marine sanctuaries and their staff. We're working closely with National Marine Fisheries Service on a large effort. It's called the West Coast Deep Sea Coral Initiative. And I think you're getting a presentation at the next meeting from Liz Clark about that at your April meeting. And what are some of the conclusions from that work we've been doing jointly? And I'll show you a couple slides just to give you a sense of where we're doing that work. But also this broad program we created working with BOEM and the U.S. Geological Survey and the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration to develop better high-resolution maps all across the West Coast, especially areas that we know are of interest. And that included mapping some areas for potential wind farm development. Everyone wants to know a better sense what that seafloor looks like. And so that's the Express program. And there's even a whole nother effort not on here. We couldn't squeeze it onto the slide. And that's another Office of Ocean Exploration partnership with Sanctuaries, with the Nautilus. And that's a deep diving vessel with a deep diving ROV capacity and what they call telepresence, where they can showcase back into classrooms and on the internet things that they are seeing and we're seeing on the seafloor. A lot of our work with Nautilus has focused on deep sea coral habitat areas. So this has been, over the last 2 or 3 years, and probably for the next 2 or 3 years, a high priority area for us in terms of research that we're doing, characterizing these habitats so that I think we all can make better management decisions with this information. If you go to the next slide, this just shows you the different, this is the West Coast sanctuaries, as well as these different sites. Different symbols are different years, different missions, different vessels. Some up in Olympic Coast, but you can see there's a whole host off of Washington and Oregon and Northern California, not inside marine sanctuaries, that were surveyed, not by us, those were by typically National Marine Fisheries Service scientists. Another set within the Central California sanctuaries, some other areas further south, and that's below Monterey Bay. Go back one more, please. Channel Islands is down there, as well as more survey sites down in Southern California. And this is important areas to the Southwest Fisheries Science Center, the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, and all of us working together to identify areas that we're going to map, where we're going to share ship time that sanctuaries might get in order to map areas even beyond sanctuaries, because someone else was sharing ship time to do deep sea coral surveys inside a sanctuary. And I think it was a wonderful partnership that didn't require the famous these days quid pro quo. It wasn't like you do this and I'll do that. It's we're going to all do this together and we're going to all see benefits from it. So now the next slide just zooms in on the 3 Central Northern California sanctuaries. Just as one example, to zoom that map in a bit more, you can see where we were doing that work. And then south of Monterey Bay Sanctuary there, where there's a cluster of sites that have been surveyed that were important from the wind farm folks, as well as Southwest Fisheries Science Center and even us in the sanctuary program. Next slide. I did talk about it last time. I think we all got a lot out of it, so I just wanted to emphasize we just continue to find some amazing things with these deep sea octopus, mostly on Davidson Seamount. We went back again after we talked last year on 2 different missions in August and October, and we found a whole separate site that's around 6 miles from the original brood. And again, these are grapefruit-sized octopus that brood their eggs for, we're now learning, maybe as many as 3 years, 40 months sitting on the seafloor, at least 18 months. And we've confirmed that these are in areas of warm water seeps coming out of the side of the seamount, where it's around 10 degrees centigrade, when the ambient's about 1.5 degrees centigrade. So they're sitting in a jacuzzi nursing these eggs in absolute darkness for 2, 3, 4 years. And it's really an amazing place, and as I said before, one that I hope the council also values, because you guys got it all started when we made it essential fish habitat, and the sanctuary was designated a couple months later. David Seaman was added to Monterey Bay Sanctuary. Next slide. I just wanted to flag this for you. There's been a series of videos that we've done. A lot of it's been through a team at Channel Islands, but they're meant to be broadly relevant on the West Coast. This particular one is a Know Before You Go video that's got some very straightforward information about safe boating, what it is that folks ought to consider as they go out boating. You know, certainly lots of commercial fishermen probably don't need this, but there's a lot of people that go out on the water that do need this advice. If no one needed this advice, we would not have 30 or 40 vessel groundings that we have to deal with inside marine sanctuaries every year. Either because equipment fails, there's improper techniques and procedures relative to navigation, assistance, even drownings, and you know, none of us want to see any of that. So we put this together. The Coast Guard was a really important partner with us in this. We got a grant from the Boat US Foundation, and you can just Google Know Before You Go on YouTube, and you can see it. There's another one I just wanted to mention. It's not in the slide deck, but we did one a year ago with Cal Fish and Wildlife, No Trap Left Behind, working with the lobster fishermen in the state of California and the NOAA Marine Debris Program to identify and articulate sensible, safe procedures to laying traps, and to ultimately, if they get lost, how do you pick them up? And how do you design them right in the first place? And the fishing industry was really interested in helping with that, the lobster fishery, because they didn't want to be tarnished with the image that it's their traps on the beaches. So that one is No Trap Left Behind. So anyway, you can Google those. They're helpful, 3-4 minute products, high quality video to help provide alternate ways for folks to get information. And then I think the last substantive slide, as I did last time, some of this is redundant with what we talked about last year, but there are opportunities for us that many were already exercising these opportunities, but to the extent there's interest, we remain committed to the IEA program, to helping develop indicators and tools that are useful to both of us. There's a lot of climate change science going on, both ocean acidification. We're highlighting work in the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, and then how do you plan from a marine protected area perspective around climate change, and Greater Farallon Sanctuary is our hub for that sort of work. The offshore industrial development, it could be a whole separate discussion, but we're very active, and it's actively evolving now regarding wind farms. That's the main industrial, offshore development that I foresee in the next couple of years, but it's going to grow, and there's just a lot of attention to it now, right now, mainly in the Central Coast. There are opportunities, and this is the San Luis Obispo, southern Monterey County area. The state of California and BOEM have been planning for years and have done some initial public outreach processes on that, but Department of Defense has had concerns with where and how much area they could afford to give up from their training grounds. There's been ongoing discussions, and there's a call on Monday, California Energy Task Force, and then a series of public workshops to get more insights on a potential proposal that DOD and the state have worked out. We've been involved in marine sanctuaries, not necessarily because we're interested in seeing wind farm development in a marine sanctuary. It's not inherently incompatible, but we don't have a mechanism right now to lease and develop it. And as I mentioned in the California meeting this morning, I want to be clear, our interests in being involved, to the extent they're hovered right around that very southwest corner of Monterey Bay Sanctuary, is where we don't want to be is independent of our involvement. BOEM or the state of California or the industry develops a project that they think is wonderful, and we would look at it. Cal Fish and Wildlife, the council, sanctuaries would look at it, fishermen, and say, what a terrible project. You're right in the middle of one of our prime trawl grounds, our prime fishing grounds. And because it's not impossible, though not easy today, but not impossible to have a wind farm inside a marine sanctuary if it was a narrow corner, and if the collective body felt like, move some of that, into 50 square miles of Monterey Bay Sanctuary in that little corner, and that's a far better project. Well, we want to be involved in that from the beginning. We don't want to end up with a bum design that we all think is not going to work. So that's part of what our motivation has been. Again, not to create, chaos within the federal decision-making process, because BOEM has a very difficult time understanding how we would even do this in a sanctuary. And we've been clear we're not trying to do it, but we also want desperately to avoid a bad project outcome that we all later would regret. So anyway, there's listed here a few other ways in which I think we can collaborate if there's interest in the council on an individual basis, for as these projects come up or broadly. And I think that's the last slide I've got of substance. You can just leave this up. These are our websites if anybody cares about the sanctuaries that are relevant here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Always good to have you come back and give us an update on what's going on. And I think the collaboration we have between the sanctuaries and the council system has been really positive when compared to our formative years.
Yeah.
And so it's really been great. Questions? Mark Grelnick.
Thank you, Chair Anderson, and thanks, Bill. I just wanted to comment. I want to thank the sanctuaries for considering changes to the regulations and the management plan to allow this clean sand that's been accumulating in Pillar Point Harbor and starving the coastline below it, and allowing it to simply be moved rather than sent to a landfill, which I guess is what's had to be done so far. It really seems to be a waste, and this seems like a more constructive solution. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just want to comment on that over the years we have identified possible solutions, and we sort of identify it and see if it works, and sometimes they've worked a little bit and sometimes not. And so we've gone back again with the encouragement of the harbor there to try yet another way of adjusting the regulations. And this creates quite a bit of an opportunity, a big window that would allow it. And while some, I think, have said, why is it taking so long? There's sort of two reasons for that. One is we've tried other things that others thought would work, and then later we heard, no, they won't. And we have this management plan process that's only open periodically, so we've used that. But we have been trying to find solutions and working with the harbor. I don't think anyone in the fishing community wants contaminated dredge spoils to end up out in the open ocean. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about clean sand where the harbor's just become this wonderful deposit pit. We got to just get it back in the literal cell and let it flow down the coast. And it would benefit the local beach and many others as it moves slowly down to the south.
Marcy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bill, and thank you also for coming this morning to our delegation discussion. You continuously impress us with your breadth of knowledge, and we really thank you for sharing with us and joining our discussions. I just want to highlight what Phil said earlier about the great partnership that the council has with the sanctuaries and how it continues to improve. And as well from the state of California side, I think there are so many glowing examples that just continue to be so important to our fishery management activities, and just like to highlight a few of those here and now. First, you're increasing participation in our council process with service on our advisory bodies. Notably, your long-term participation in the Habitat Committee as well as on the Ecosystem Work Group. You're bringing a lot of expertise to the table, and we really appreciate those contributions on an ongoing basis. It's been great. Also want to note the activities that have gone on in Northern California through the monitoring efforts conducted by the Gulf of the Farallones on kelp forest restoration activities and recovery and restoration. the white abalone recovery efforts through some coordinated survey efforts to locate wild white abalone with CDFW and the Channel Islands National Sanctuary. You highlighted the collaborative work on seafloor mapping through the Express program that helps inform us on deep sea coral and seafloor habitat, which will ultimately help inform fisheries management as well as coastal hazards and planning efforts throughout the California current. Also want to note the Monterey Bay Sanctuary Management Plan review. Really appreciate you highlighting the potential regulatory changes for us now that helps the council determine how we engage with the sanctuaries and whether ONMS needs to come back to the council. Also, with regard to enforcement activities, there's been quite a lot going on. We want to provide a shout out to Karen Grimmer with Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, who has been serving as an advisor to the Dungeness Crab Fishing Working Group, and for her help coordinating on the water ropeless gear demonstration activities in conjunction with CDFW personnel. The sanctuary program, you mentioned some of this too, participated in recent statewide marine enforcement trainings with the department. And we also want to acknowledge the close working relationship we have with you on the JEA sanctuary work that is currently being done in all of the California sanctuaries. So thanks very much, and it's always a pleasure to kind of highlight the year's accomplishments and partnership activities.
Yeah, thank you. If I could add just two quick things. We thought about creating an emphasis in this report on enforcement and kelp and felt. That's going to be better next year, so just expect to see that because we are doing a lot of great stuff. NOAA Office of Law Enforcement has increased its efforts, uniformed officers. That helps to have a team to interact with Cal Fish and Wildlife officers, and same in Washington State. And so there's some good things happening in that regard, as well as on the kelp. We just got a budget last week after the report was written, and we're going to be able to do some more field work up on the North Coast, working closely with you all at Cal Fish and Wildlife on, how do we at least find ways to maybe stimulate recovery of kelp ecosystems up there. So I appreciate those comments.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. Other comments? Corey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Bill. Echo all the thanks you've been given already, and I just wanted to give a quick note of appreciation to your Olympic Coast folks and on the condition report update. I've been involved in that process from the beginning, and it's more as my state agency role than as a council representative here. And it's really impressive to see what a big tent they've had in reaching out to experts. And we had a workshop at the beginning of the year you all held a workshop at the beginning of the year, and at the Quinault Beach Resort in January, there was some wind and snow on the beach, so not everyone could make it from the Puget Sound area to out there, but it was impressed to see how many people did show up, and it's been really impressive to see how you're engaging our tribal co-managers, which make this sanctuary maybe one of the everybody's unique and every place is unique, but a really special sanctuary, the 4 treaty tribes out there. So it's been really impressive to see. I know there's a long way to go and a lot of conversations left to be had. And I guess just I will be giving input, and I admire your conditions report for trying to communicate consistently across your sanctuaries and communicate to decision makers and the public, but I have been expressing some concerns about how oversimplifying what is a nuanced and really rich story with simple rankings of trends and status. So I hope, and I hear good things from your staff on providing a good science-based picture of what's going on in that very important area of our coast. And so again, I'm just appreciating all the effort. It's really hard to coordinate with such a large group, and but I think it's going to be worthwhile, and again, very appreciated.
Yeah, thanks. Your comment's valuable and timely in that in the broader sanctuary family at other parts of the country, there's some grumbling. Is the condition report process worth all the effort? And one of the things that, I think it is, but one of the things I had never weighed is the point you're making as a partner having a chance to be a participant in that and the value that that gives you and sort of trust and confidence, even though if it's maybe too simplified, how do we make it a little more robust? That's something we sometimes can forget as we're going through these efforts. I know the Olympic Coast team thinks it's worth every bit of the effort, but I'll take that back as we have a big discussion coming up in a few months about, should we change it or not? And I hadn't thought of, and I'll bring back your perspective as a participant.
Great. Any other comments for Bill? And once again, thank you very, very much for coming to our meeting and providing this report.
Thanks for the opportunity.
We do have a report from the Habitat Committee, I believe. Corey, you.
Thank you, Chair Anderson and Council. I'm going to read the Habitat Committee report on the National Marine Sanctuaries report. The HC received a presentation from Dr. Lisa Wunik on the annual report from the Office of the National Marine Sanctuaries aimed at enhancing coordination and collaboration among ONMS, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Council. The HC notes that the National Marine Sanctuaries have been engaged actively in seafloor mapping and visual surveys of deep-sea corals and sponges via remotely operated vehicles or autonomous underwater vehicles. Many of these activities are part of the West Coast Deep Sea Coral Initiative that went from 2018 to 2020. Major objectives of this initiative include gathering baseline information prior to implementation of Amendment 28 of the Pacific Groundfish Fishery Management Plan, improving our understanding of known deep-sea coral and sponge bycatch hotspots, and exploring and assessing deep-sea coral and sponge resources within national marine sanctuaries, with an emphasis on resource protection and other management concerns.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the Habitat Committee's report? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? We do not. Any further discussion on the National Marine Sanctuaries report? Okay, that'll conclude this agenda item then. It's a little after 11. We've been at this a little over 2 hours. I think we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and start up with Habitat issue agenda item and see how far we get before our lunch break. So I would ask you to be back in your seats no later than 11:25.